operate with low overhead to start with. So the bookkeeping co-op I worked for, pretty much the only overhead was some computers. You see a lot of home cleaning, home care co-ops operate because these are labor-intense industries. So in labor-intense industries with low overhead is a really prime target for converting businesses into worker co-ops. I want to point out the Measurable co-op. In case y'all haven't heard of it, it's, I think, the biggest co-op in the world. It has 75,000 employees. And I just want to point out that like co-ops can get big and really become important parts of regional and national and even international industries. And they're based in the Basque region of Spain. So I think they're a really cool example. They have their own kind of set of cooperative principles that they follow. They got founded in the 50s. This is one of my favorite slides because you'll probably recognize two logos here that you never knew were co-ops. The first one is Ocean Spray, the cranberry juice. And so this is the producers and marketing co-ops. And Ocean Spray is essentially a co-op of cranberry farmers. And the way that a lot of producer and marketing co-ops work is that they take some middleman out of the equation by banding together to form a co-op that acts as a market intermediary. So Ocean Spray, all the farmers operate this co-op to get their cranberries. And Ocean Spray does some value add, so they add all the sugar to your cranberry juice and then sell it to you. So that's one way you often see producers co-ops used. It's really common in the agriculture industry. We have a Central Texas Farmers Co-op is a regional Central Texas organic farming co-op that brings organic food to markets. And a lot of the traditional like grain elevators in the Midwest were organized as agricultural co-ops. Question? Yeah, so in a lot of the producer and marketing co-ops, it's typically businesses that are members. Not necessarily so, but often is the case. And I think one counterexample of it is the last co-op that's on this slide is Polycot, and they are essentially freelance web developers. So they organize to get some resources that are better off when pulled together. So if they got a gig that was just more than an individual could do, they could spread it around other people that might not have as much work that week, and then also to share some kind of business infrastructure type stuff like payroll and banking. So that is a way that a producer co-op might be organized. So why would you want to build a co-op? And there are a lot of different reasons why you would want a co-op. I think if you get into like the kind of academic thought on cooperatives, you'll often hear people say that it helps resolve broken market issues. So this first slide about access to goods and services is often that kind of issue. So a really classic example that you'll see is fisheries, which are a common resource. They'll organize it as a co-op to prevent overfishing. The main lobster industry has large portions that operate under a co-op governance model. The rural electric co-op example from earlier is also an example of this, like getting access to goods and services that you couldn't under a purely for-profit conventional firm model. And kind of some of the other things we'll talk about today, like affordable housing in Austin. Like it's really hard to find unless you live in a co-op. Or the Wheatsville Co-op, which was founded in the 70s, was one of the first natural foods before there was organic grocers in town, way before Whole Foods got started. So this idea of providing goods and services that you just can't get under the traditional market is a really common thought. They also make a good economic development strategy. So because it keeps resources in the local community, especially compared to other economic development strategies where you bring in a big corporation from out of town, and then you might get like a tax boost and some extra revenue, but it gets the profits and wealth gets extracted out of the community to where the owners are. And most co-ops are definitely very local and regional based. So the community wealth is easier to build. There's a commitment to democracy, as I mentioned a couple times in the principles. If you are particularly ideologically bent on supporting co-ops. This is for democracy. This is a good avenue. And it definitely taught me a lot about politics and democracy and how government and governance works. Because when I was 19, I really didn't care that much about those kind of things. And I'll say that like on a kind of macro level, most people work in conventional firms, which are essentially organized as an autocratic system, hierarchical, autocratic. And a lot of these folks are the people that end up in kind of community groups and government. So it doesn't really surprise me when you find people that who've never really experienced a real democracy, like get into government and don't know how a democracy works. They're great at building communities. We've got this great community space, so thanks, Rob, for helping us host this. Rob and Laurel House. And because you're operating these businesses in close proximity with all these people, it's a very easy, natural way to foster communities. And there's this kind of pervasive problem in modern America where people have been like atomized and separated from the communities. There was that whole phenomena with the book Bowling Alone that talked about the decline in bowling leagues and church attendance and social clubs, and like that's not coming back. Like that's gone. So this is an interesting alternative to try to build up community that's been lost over time. You get to stay in your workplace because it is democratically managed by the people involved. Most workplaces don't have that. Same thing for housing. You get a lot of say in what you do with your housing co-op or your worker co-op. And there are tax advantages, which not that big a deal, to be honest. If you incorporate as a Texas co-op, Chapter 251, you get a franchise tax exemption. So not a big deal, but it's there. So we'll get more into housing co-ops. There's 3 different kinds. So 3 different kinds you could just potentially develop or be interested in developing. And also, just so y'all are aware, I handed Allie some surveys. So if you're really interested in working on new co-ops, I've got a survey that kind of asks what is your area of interest for starting a new co-op, like what type of housing co-op, or whether you're a real estate professional or knowledgeable about finance. So just kind of try to get people together with the different skills you need to develop a co-op. So you'll grab that now or at the end if you're inclined to do that. So there are 3 different housing co-ops, and this is kind of like business structure form. You can have a housing co-op in any type of building. So this is a mid-rise, but you see housing co-ops in large houses or apartment complexes, small apartment complexes. So you can kind of put it anywhere, but this is how it gets organized as a organization. And I made this beautiful graphic to help illustrate the differences. So the first one, which is the most like a traditional firm, so we'll use a condo as an example because this is what it resembles, is a market rate co-op. And like a condo, an individual member owns their unit, their space, and they own it outright. There are some limitations in that you can't own more than 1 unit to maintain the 1 member, 1 vote. So it is different from a condo in that it has a lot of the co-op-y governance structures, but you're allowed to sell your co-op membership on the open market at market prices. And it's only really interesting as I think for this setting in kind of comparing it to the other models. So you can see that the little co-op members own the title to their house completely. In the next model, it's the opposite. So this is the group or common equity model. And this is actually what every co-op in Austin operates under at the moment. And this is, the co-op owns everything basically. It owns the real estate, it owns the business of the co-op. And membership, instead of being based on owning a ephemeral piece of a business share, is based on a contractual agreement between the co-op and the members. So the co-op promises to provide housing, and then the member in return has to help cover their share of the cost of the housing, and then they get to vote and set policy and manage the house how they like in a democratic way. And most housing co-ops also have a labor requirement, so you're obligated to pitch in some work to help maintain low costs. So in a lot of ways, it operates as a nonprofit, and a lot of local co-ops are actually incorporated as nonprofits. Um, and so you'll see a lot of this going on. The next one is the one that I'm personally, I think, most interested on a like development angle. Like this is something that I think about a lot and I'm trying to make in the future. And it's the limited equity model. And this is kind of like a mix of the two. So it can vary between a group equity, which has like a standard deposit type situation. So it might be like a big deposit that you put into the co-op to move in, or it could be something like 50 to 75, maybe even 80, 90% of what it might be if it were on the market. So some of the benefits of this model is that it does make it a little bit easier for individuals who have savings to finance a co-op, even without providing the actual full amount of financing. So you can get some interesting loan structures to kind of lower the down payment costs. But it also has really great applications in affordable housing policy and maintaining affordable housing. So there's two ways in which that people think about this in an affordable housing sense. The first is that because it's there's a limited equity piece here, there isn't the expectation that you can sell this on the open market to anyone who wants to have housing. It's harder to sell these interests in a co-op, and it's typically mediated by the co-op instead of by the market. And there's often resale restrictions. So people who put in a fair amount of money and then live there for 20 years don't lose all the value that they put in due to inflation. So you see things like a resale restriction that is tied to inflation. So you're only allowed to get as much as you would have lost from inflation, or it could be just a straight like 1%, 2% kind of appreciation per year. And the other way that you see it kind of, well, and let me linger on that a little bit longer. So in affordable housing world, there's kind of the idea that you provide a subsidy and you can often lose the subsidy because it's essentially a wealth transfer. So like if I received 100 grand from the government as a subsidy and buy a house with it, and then I sell the house, then I've kept that $100,000. And so the idea is that you want to try to keep the subsidy with the housing instead of with the individuals. That way you can perpetually maintain affordable housing instead of continuously funding it. So this is kind of the thinking behind these resale restrictions. Then it also ties well with other affordable housing kind of methodologies. So you can put a limited equity co-op with the resale restrictions on a community land trust, which is a land basically owned by your taxing authority. So it's owned by the city or the county. They don't have to pay property taxes, so they pass along the savings to the residents. And so it pairs well with other affordable housing situations. So to get specifically into the benefits of housing co-ops, I think there's definitely talking to the community piece and the social piece is, I think, one of the biggest components of the benefits of co-ops. And so to kind of emphasize that, I want to tell you about how I found out about the co-ops. So, I found out from a friend of mine who was in class with me, and she was organizing a club, extracurricular, like outdoorsy club I was interested in. And she's like, hey, we're having a meeting at Arrakis. And I thought it was cool that they named it after the planet Dune. So I was like, I gotta go. That's awesome. And I didn't know it was a co-op. I didn't know what a co-op was. But I show up and I look to my right and there's a couple of guys playing ping pong in the dining room because the dining table was a ping pong table. And there's some folks studying in the living room, people cooking in the kitchen, and I can hear people talking upstairs. And I was just really amazed that this type of housing existed. It really reminded me a lot of when I would go visit my grandparents in Mexico. My mom's from there. We've got the big traditional Mexican extended family, so I get to see all the cousins and aunts and uncles and hang out for a month. And I would always miss it when I would come home. And just kind of social isolation piece. I was like, there's something weird going on. So I think that is one of the biggest benefits. I think it's why you see a lot of people interested in co-ops in the first place and why they move in. And then I think there's a lot of kind of like economic and kind of ideological reasons why people really like stick with it in the long run. But one of the benefits of having like a really social environment is that there's a lot of social production that happens. And I think one of the really visible things is how food gets done. And we're in a kitchen. There's a lot of food here. But there's bulk prep food in most co-ops. Hey Rob, how many meals do you cook a week during the semester? 14 meals. 14 meals a week. So college houses has really big houses, so they've got the labor capacity to do that much food. A lot of the other housing co-ops that are kind of in the 20 to 40 range, they're doing, 5 to 6 meals a week, basically like weeknights. But you save the time of cooking meals on those days. Someone has the labor they're assigned to go buy the food and bring it. So you save the time with the grocery trips. Although some people will still go to the grocery store for kind of very individual items or like luxury items. So for me, I go to the store about every time my dog finishes her food. And then when I go, I'll typically buy dog food, 2 liters of soda, coffee, maybe some chocolate. But I'm not going that often. And obviously, like, food is something that is very communal and sharing it, so that kind of adds to the community. The next benefit is kind of, I want to emphasize about car use. Sticking with the food example, if you have 20 people going to the grocery store once a week, that's a lot more than if you've got one person going once or twice a week for 20 people. So you can save a lot on car trips. And when I'm at like local neighborhood meetings where we're talking about like reducing parking limits, those kind of things, like one of the biggest complaints you'll hear from people who support like parking is like, how am I going to get my groceries? And so I'll often respond with this, like, someone gets my groceries for me, fine. So you save on the transit for that. Because it's a social environment, there's a lot more opportunities to engage in social atmosphere. So you might be less inclined to drive to your friend's place or to the bar because you have that experience at home. It's easier I get access to carpools. Everyone you live with. So I've totally been in the situation where someone knocked on my door and was like, "Can I borrow your keys? I've got an emergency." And you're happy to do it because, like, where they live, who their friends are. Like it's easy to imagine that they are trustworthy. So I think the two things that I've talked about are kind of like intangible cost benefits and like social benefits, but there's some really huge measurable benefits to being in a housing co-op. And so co-ops are very affordable compared to your normal housing situation. This graph comes from some research we did with ACBA in 2017, and we were finding, compared to other housing in the neighborhood, prices ranging from 50 to 70% of market rate. And I think the one with the best performance was the Sunflower Co-op, which is in the Bolden neighborhood, just south of downtown, south of the river. And I think some of the keys to why they're affordable is that, the longer it's been around, the more affordable it is. And obviously, if you're in a central area that's appreciating, then that comparison gets a little bit more extreme. So we have a couple of ideas why co-ops are this affordable. The first one comes from this concept that like a lot of the co-ops are doing labor to support the house. So you're talking about 4 to 5 hours a week, 20 people, that's 100 hours a week. That's like 2 full-time people of work that's getting accomplished by house members. So, that's like a property manager and a couple of contractors that you're not having to pay every week. So that's a huge component of the affordability. I think there's also this idea that you've removed like the capitalist owner from the equation, which is a little bit harder to emphasize, to like really figure out what the impact of that is. But the way that I like to think about it is that, this owner is expecting a rate of return, right? 8% of growth every year. And that's on top of costs. So the cost increase and then they get their rate of return. So you have this kind of linear plus exponential curve that increase costs. And for a housing co-op, you essentially eliminate the exponential part of this cost increase formula, and you're just, or at least the biggest component of it. You still have some of it in property taxes, depending on where you live. Property taxes can go up exponentially. But basically, you're talking about increases in utilities, food costs, and kind of like supplies and maintenance materials for the costs. So what is driving costs to go up? And just for, I wish I had like a time series. We're planning on doing another one of these. I think at La Reunion, just kind of anecdotally, I know that our rents go up between $5 and $20 a year, kind of depending on how well the year went. So it's pretty consistently the same instead of like an exponential growth on costs every year. So I live in La Reunion, which is an apartment complex, and I think it's one of the more multi-generational and diverse co-ops in town. Most of the co-ops in town are actually student co-ops. It's about 3/4 of the co-op community are student co-ops. And then a lot of the other co-ops are basically feeders, like people graduate and then move into them. So you typically tend to see a younger, educated crowd in co-ops. But one of the things that I think has been really valuable about the La Reunion experience is that it's one of the only apartment complex style co-ops. So it's got a little bit more private space and just a little bit more space. And I think this has helped get a more diverse and multi-generational housing. And some of the benefits of having that, we've got some elderly members at La Reunion. There's two in particular that kind of require assistance and like check-ins on occasion. One of them discovered that he had cancer right after he moved in. And, he needs help getting to the hospital. And the other one, I actually saw outside. He was smoking a cigarette and he couldn't talk right. And I ended up taking him to the hospital and we found out he had a stroke. So there's kind of this social checking in on folks and making sure people are doing okay. Because if either of them had disappeared for 3 days, you would know pretty quick that was the situation. We have one child living in our co-op, and I think if you had more parents living in co-ops, you'd see a lot more organized kind of babysitting. So that is a potential benefit that you'll see, I think, as the co-op community expands. There's a lot of skill sharing that happens, skill sharing. So one of our members is a mechanic, and he actually gets labor for helping folks fix their cars and do oil changes. Some of our members are programmers and developers and work with technology, so they can help people out with their computer issues. I got a member that cuts my hair every once in a while. There's one right now, actually. I do bookkeeping finance work, so sometimes people will ask me about kind of personal finance, how do I save more money, how do I budget type stuff, and I'm happy to help people out. So you get a lot of opportunity to meet folks and work on it. One of the ways that we've worked on developing more diversity in La Reunion is that we've had this partner program where we work with housing nonprofits that specialize in placing people in housing. And it's been challenging. We've had some success with one in particular, which was the veteran placement, homeless vet placement from Caritas. And we've had two members from that program that have been pretty successful. One of them actually was the person who developed cancer, and the other one was a homeless person of color who was able to move in. And I think that's been a really cool experience because of, I think, the barracks life and the social atmosphere of co-op. They actually did pretty well, I think, or adjusted pretty well to it. So in some other ways, we once had a member that got mugged. We did a GoFundMe for him to raise some money to get him back on his feet. And there's also some amount of political diversity. You see a lot of socialist, lefty type people, and then moderates and liberals, and even some libertarians. And kind of given that amount of diversity, I think there's a lot of socialist aspects of cooperative housing. So I think there's a lot of good opportunities to have conversations with people who aren't socialists, to expose them to the model. And so I know probably none of you agree with this quote, but I think it shows that there are people that feel that at some level, or people who are not socialists, that at some level believe that there's some place for collective ownership, collectivized institutions. And I think this community co-op level of organization is a really good place to have those kind of conversations and talk about those kind of things. And I spent a really long time trying to find a definitive source. I found a couple, but none of them were definitive. But I've heard in a few different places, so I think it was pretty interesting. And there have been some socialist critiques of housing co-ops, and they've been around for a long time. I think Karl Marx expressed something like this, and then Garl Perovitz in America Beyond Capitalism also expressed this kind of sentiment. And the idea is that even if you have a co-op, they will be obligated by the environment and the incentive structures in place to act like capitalists. And I think like these folks will tell you that it's not like that we shouldn't do that, that maybe it shouldn't be the biggest priority is the argument. I'll say in my experience, I think that like because the people who benefit from a co-op are vastly different from your traditional firms, that even if they, even if you have like, a homeless veteran who's acting like a capitalist, he's getting something out of the deal. So I think it still helps communities that have been exploited heavily by capitalist structures. So even if you assume this is true, I think it's still a great model for helping people and supporting them. So if that didn't convince you to not be involved in co-ops, here are some ways you can be involved in co-ops. I think the easiest way to get more involved, in the sense that you'll learn a lot and there's like not a lot of risk, is to move into a co-op. It's actually pretty hard to get into a co-op. This is literally pretty much all the co-ops in Austin at the moment, and the student co-ops make up 600 of the 800 people that live in housing co-ops. So it can be tough to get in, but it is a really educational experience and you'll learn a lot. And if you're interested in starting a co-op, I think it helps a lot to have had the experience of being in one and managing one. So I'm with the ACBA. We're like a chamber of commerce for co-ops. So we do a lot of advocacy work. So you can come volunteer with us. So I'm the chair of our housing committee, and we've done a lot of work at City Hall. We've passed a couple of pieces of legislation at City Hall. One of them guaranteeing that we could get access to the bond funding from the recent bond campaign. And we've done some cool things like get the city to really look at tenant opportunity to purchase, particularly for like neglected properties. And that is slowly the gears are turning on those things. So we do, local advocacy. If you feel guilty about shopping on Amazon because they're a giant corporation, you can feel exactly 0.5% less guilty by using our Amazon Smile accounts. You can find that on acba.coop. A lot of this ACBA stuff you can find on our website, acba.coop, or on our Facebook, and that's the best way to find out about events that are going on. Or you can start a co-op. And this is a simple framework that I got from the Texas Rural Cooperative Center. They are a Texas-based co-op development nonprofit that's based out of the UT Rio Grande. And one of the ACBA board members actually works with them doing development. So she's been a good resource for things like strategic planning and kind of helping people get oriented to the co-op community. So to start a housing co-op, I think there's you need to think about it like a real estate project. There are 4 things that you need for a real estate project. And I stole this 4 things framework from a guy named John Anderson, who does incremental development, as opposed to like big capital intensive tract development. So I think it's kind of a good, similar to co-op. I'm happy to plug his work. But so there's 4 things that you need to have a real estate development. And the idea is that you, as the person who's starting a co-op project, should be an expert, or at least very good at one of these 4 things. And then it's typically really hard to get a second person who is an expert who believes in your project enough to help you, But once you got two, it's pretty easy to get the other two and finish the project. And there is no real particular order. Some of these are a little bit more important than others, and there are some that I think you can kind of minimize and reduce the impact of. I'll point those out when we get there. But this is really kind of a chicken or egg cyclical process. You do a little bit of one thing and do the next thing, and then come back around. So we'll get into it. So this thing is property. So you can be the expert and kind of control this if you are the owner of the property, or you have a friend who is really dedicated to the idea, who owns the property. This is typically a difficult one, unless you're older and have money and have been around for a while. If you don't have access to property, then you're going to have to find a real estate agent that will work with you. They get paid on commission, so it's usually not that hard to find a real estate agent. We do have some real estate agents in town that are from the co-op community that we can kind of help you get in touch with, that we are in touch with, and they will actively help us look for properties and evaluate properties. And when you're looking at properties, like I think the key is to find a property, in your price range, in the right location. But if you're actually evaluating a building, I think the key is you want to find a building that has enough common space to foster spontaneous social interactions, and for there to be organized social activities. And then I'll also add that you want this common space to be between someone's private space and the exit to the property. So I think to use an example that makes sense is you have a property with a courtyard, right? Everyone leaves their apartment and they're in this courtyard. If this was organized in such a way that the doors were facing out and then everyone walked onto this, like a walk up, and then everyone walked out into the street, that would be a bad example of a co-op because everyone just leaves without having the chance to interact with other people. Another classic example is another courtyard apartment as opposed to a motel where you walk out and get in the car. Garages attached to private spaces, bad. Don't buy that house, or convert the garage into a bedroom. Do not use that property. So I think there's a lot of variability. You'll see a lot of options. Price can be difficult. You might look kind of not in central Austin to find more affordable properties, or even outside of Austin. I think the real estate market in central Austin is getting to be really hard. There's still stuff available, but it's challenging. The next thing is entitlements. And when we were organizing this, Marina said that y'all would maybe having an entitlements conversation. It's not really that important for my purposes, so I'll keep it brief. It's basically, can you build a co-op on the land? You might have great land. You might even have a great property that suits your co-op. But if you're not allowed to have a co-op there because the rules and regulations don't allow it, then you can't do that. This is also a pretty hard one to be like the expert in. The experts in entitlements are the people who are at City Hall trying to get your property rezoned and facing a bunch of neighborhood opposition. So those are the kind of folks that are good at that. And for this, you just kind of want to minimize it and just ask your real estate agents, or just own a property that doesn't have any of these restrictions. Just go for the thing that you can put a co-op on. So the two big restrictions that you're going to want to make sure that you are not encountering when you're looking at property are the unrelated person's occupancy limit is the first one. And that is 4 or 6 unrelated people in one unit. One way you can avoid it is, we do this at La Reunion. So La Reunion has 2-bedroom apartments, 700 square feet. The limit for each unit is 6 people. It's pretty hard to have 6 unrelated people occupying 700 square feet. We haven't done it yet. No one's gotten close to wanting it yet. It just has not been an issue. So you can make it not an issue in your development by having many discrete units that are relatively small. The other way to avoid this issue is just to make sure that your property has the group residential use. And the group residential use is kind of the boarding home, frat house, dorm co-op use, and it allows you to have more than 6 people in a unit. And it's not really common. These are hard to find. It's in what's called multifamily 4 and more intense. So we're talking about apartment buildings with 15 to 20 units and bigger. So you're talking about like things that a developer could buy for a lot of money and put a mid-rise apartment on. So the price competition is pretty steep on these lots. So also kind of something that you want to avoid unless you're pretty savvy. If you get a really small lot that's MF4, like that can be effective because the developer can't put a structured parking spot on it. So that's one way that you could get access to this MF4. So yeah, you want to try to avoid these things and minimize the impact of the entitlements. The next thing is financing. This is tricky and is really hard to avoid no matter what. Even if you're just renting a building to put your co-op in, you're still going to have to put deposits down. And you're probably talking about making a commercial lease and getting guarantors. And I'm working with a project right now that's like right in the middle of it, of trying to like get this commercial lease. So I've seen that this can be challenging even if you're just leasing a building. And so some of the challenges are that your big lending institutions don't really know what co-ops are. Like talk to your average mortgage officer and they don't know what a co-op is. So it's hard to get money. And some of the co-op principles that make it in opposition to capitalism means that it's hard to get capitalists on board, like kind of no duh, but that is one of the reasons why it's hard to get financing, because you're not willing to give the person with the money voting rights in your organization just because they have money. So that can be a challenge for getting financing. So what you need to get the financing is either the individuals in your development project need to have enough resources, enough income, enough savings to do these things on their own, or you need to partner with someone who, probably one of the local co-op groups or kind of development companies that does that and is able to support that. And really what the bank is looking for is like a track record. So if you made a lot of money in your life and you can show the bank that, they don't really care what you're doing as long as you can pay them back. So that is the benefit of working with the banks, is they don't actually care that much about whether you're a co-op or not. And if you're working from a inside of a co-op to kind of expand an existing co-op, presumably that co-op's been around for a long time. College House has been around since like the 60s or 70s. So it's not that challenging for them to, maybe even the 50s. It's not that challenging for them to get financing. Once they have the hour-long conversation, like, well, this is what a co-op is. And there are institutions that are co-op friendly that you can approach as your first financiers. Once you've kind of got the basic setup of people who can provide the down payment, like you can have a less difficult conversation with a loan officer who already knows what a co-op is, and we've got some of them up here. The first two are Community Development Finance Institutions, CDFIs. I think that's what that acronym stands for. The second one is a kind of revolving loan fund grant program. The third one is, and then obviously y'all know what the last one is. We can get bond money from them. And they have guaranteed to me that co-ops have access to it and they know we exist. So it's something that I'd like to see happen. We haven't done it yet. We haven't gotten bond money from the city yet. So it's still kind of they say you can, but let's make it happen. So the last thing, which I think is going to be the easiest for a group like you that has people and organizing skills, is kind of getting the tenants / members that are going to move in. This is something that can be challenging if you don't have already a community of like-minded people to do. And so for the group of folks that is looking to move in and organizing it, obviously there's a few things. Like if you're a group of people looking to start a co-op, you're going to have to convince those the other 3 groups of people that have the other things that you need to believe in you. So you've got to make that happen. And you can do this by reaching out to real estate agents, reaching out to banks, kind of doing a lot of the things that we were just talking about. Meeting and setting up co-op structures, maybe talk about like bylaws and who's good at what, and kind of start to build a co-op before you move into the co-op. So that's a big role of any group of future co-op members. And then, once you're kind of in the zone where you look like you're gonna make it happen, then a really big key is having flexibility in move-in, or at least enough financing available that you can kind of eat the costs of low vacancy or of low occupancy, high vacancies when you first start the co-op. Because even if you strive to have like the most flexible group of people, not everyone's going to be able to move on August 1st. So some of the strategies I've seen for people who have been flexible, and this is true if you're just looking to move into a co-op or pretty much any housing situation. The people who are flexible are the people that are on a month-to-month lease. They live on their friend/parent's couch. They live in an existing co-op that maybe they can convince everyone to let them out of their contract. And so these are all strategies that I've seen people use to be flexible on the move-in date and time period. And yeah, you'll want to have like the diversity of skills that I was talking about that you need to start a co-op. So I've got a couple of strategies for starting co-ops that I've seen work. The first is kind of the independent lease co-op. So you've got a group of people, you don't have a lot of money, so you're going to rent a house or a building to be in. You find something that doesn't have the entitlements and suits your needs, and you move in. And this is actually fairly common. I've known a lot of people, a lot of college co-opers who this is essentially what they do. Like they like co-ops. They do it kind of informally, and they move in. There's some pros and cons. This is kind of like the quick and dirty way of making a co-op. Requires the least amount of resources. You don't have to form a legal entity, right? You can do it as a partnership, informal partnership. Pretty much every other co-op is going to require you to have like a nonprofit or be incorporated as a co-op. The cons are you miss out on some of the really great price impacts from still having a landlord. That you might get some of it depending on your landlord. You might get the landlord who doesn't care if you do all the maintenance, so they reduce your rent because you're taking on the work. So you do get a little bit of that benefit if you can get that kind of agreement with your landlord, but you don't get the big bucks kind of cost reductions by having a landlord. Yeah, so it's not affordable. It's hard to get support from other local institutions that would support a co-op. One, because you're less likely to have engaged with these support structures in your founding because it was quick and easy, and that's how it happened. And also, there isn't as much to lose. If you're a co-op in crisis and you own an expensive piece of land, there's a lot more to lose, and so it's a lot easier to really get help from people who are invested in the community to get the help. So this is the least long-term stable way, but it is a way to get people's foot in the door and starting projects. The next one is same idea, but you buy it instead. So the differences in this one is that either your members are got a little bit more money, or you're working with individuals that can support it. But it's still kind of done as a solo project. And these, I think, are kind of the hardest ones to make happen. I've seen it happen a couple times in the existence of Austin. A lot of the early college co-ops essentially had to do it this way. The Sunflower Co-op did it this way. Whitehall, I think. Whitehall's getting real old. I'm not actually sure how they did it, but I know they own it and they're independent. So they got there somehow. And then Sosona kind of did that. Sosona's in the Zilker neighborhood. They had some support, which I'll get into in a minute. Yeah, so this one has the long-term affordability and has the financing issues that I mentioned already. So this one is the one that I think you kind of see have the most success in Austin. This is expanding the co-op from an existing co-op. This is how Law Reunion was founded. this is how basically all of the college co-ops, except for the very first ones, were founded. Sona was somewhat in this way because they were able to get college houses to guarantee the purchase, the lease of a building, and then they entered a crisis. And because they had a relationship with a big co-op institution, they were able to get bought and incorporated into some co-op institutions to stabilize it. So they were able to work their way up into an ownership position. So like I said, this is the most stable way to do it. You typically have an institution that has the financing, has the resources and kind of membership and skills to make a co-op happen. So for this kind of project, you kind of have a lot, the hard part done with, and then it's just work for 6 months to a year to nail down where you're going to live and who's going to move in. So most successful, but you don't always have a local co-op that is willing and able to provide that type of institutional support. So if the timing's not right, you may have to rely on one of the other two models. So yeah, and I'm getting into these when I talk about them. So stable, harder to do, lots of different cats to herd. And I did want to talk about something that I didn't include in the slideshow, which I think is really cool, that I think a lot of y'all heard of, but we are looking at converting mobile homes to cooperatives in Austin. Today, this kind of just happened like in the last few weeks. So that's a really exciting project that's being done by CHIA, which is the La Reunion Sona organization. And so that's just a completely other model. And I am not an expert on that, so just want to like mention it, but I can't really tell you a lot of the details about it. And that's it, y'all.